Hello everybody and welcome to this IFST webinar on enhancing nutrition, unleashing the potential of plant-based foods through fortification strategies. My name's Kate Halliwell. I'm going to be your chair this afternoon. I'm the chair of the Food Science and Nutrition Special Interest Group at the IFST, and we're the people who've organised for this webinar to happen. I'm also the Chief Scientific Officer at the Food and Drink Federation as my day job. So lots of us are starting to choose plant-based diets, and for those of you that have regularly logged on to the webinars that we host here, you may remember that we have discussed this previously, but really then we were kind of focusing in on what's a balanced diet, how do you make sure that people still obtain the right amounts of micronutrients. Whereas this time we're focused a bit more really on what are the products that should be out there and what are the solutions. So we're going to kick off the session with an overview of the market for plant-based products at the moment, and then kind of lead into a couple of really different approaches to how you might think about fortification if you were launching a product. So one is around biofortification and one is looking at microcapsules. So really interesting and innovative areas. We're really lucky today that we've got three great speakers. Carol Bingley, who is Technical Specialist at RSSL, Jenny Walton, who is Head of Commercial and Scaling Global for Harvest Plus, and Hannah Pearce, who is the Nutrition Manager for Zampler. For more information about these speakers, if you'd like to know a little bit more about what they've done in their careers, then their bios are on the IFST website. Each of our speakers today is going to present for just under 10 minutes, so that we're hoping to have around about 30 minutes for Q&A. And so just for a little bit of housekeeping, the webinar is being recorded and it is going to get uploaded to the IFST's webinar hub. Please do make comments, as it says on the screen there, and ask questions throughout the webinar. You can use the Q&A button, which is at the bottom of your screen. As well as asking questions, you can upvote other people's questions. That just means I know which is the most popular question and I can make sure that we make time to ask that at the end. If we will try to respond to all of the questions that come in. These sessions can quite often be a bit lively, so if we don't, we do have the presenters' contact details and they're happy for those to be shared, so you'll see that at the end as well. So keep the questions coming in, and with that I'm going to hand you over to the first of our speakers, Carol.
Thanks, Kate. Okay, yeah, so as Kate said, I'm just going to start with a bit of an overview of the plant-based market. So my details are on the screen, and I'm a technical specialist working in the product development team here at RSSL. I'm going to give a very brief introduction. Obviously, time is quite tight, so if you're interested in RSSL, probably best to go and look at our website. Can talk a little bit about the market. There's been quite a lot of negative press recently about the state of the plant-based market, but then look at some of the innovation and new products that we're seeing coming to the market, and then focus a little bit on nutritional profile and where we see some opportunities. So RSSL is a contract research organisation. We serve both the food and pharmaceutical areas. I've just got some of the food offerings on that slide there, but as I say, I'm not going to spend much time on this. Very detailed slide here with lots, just to show that we really do support across the full product development cycle, right from concept all the way through to launch. So as I said, we've seen quite a lot of negative news around the plant-based market. Unfortunately, some companies have struggled recently and had to go into administration or cut jobs, and some products have been pulled off the market, and this has really been taken to sort of indicate that the plant-based market is in decline. But maybe this is being overstated somewhat. We may not have seen the growth that had been predicted, but there was still growth of around 6% last year in plant-based foods, and the plant-based meat grew to about 2 billion, which accounts for around 6% of the overall prepackaged meat market. So it's fairly significant. Milk alternatives have really been a success story in the plant-based area, and now around a third of UK consumers claim to drink plant-based milk alternatives on a regular basis. Veganuary continues to grow year on year, and in January this year, over 1,500 new products and menus were launched for Veganuary. Notably, Asda actually launched 2 complete new ranges, and this was equivalent to over 100 products that were brought to the market. Aldi have also launched a plant-based range, and the prices are starting at around 99p for some products, so addressing some of those concerns around price. Obviously, the cultivated meat and seafood area is really exciting, and we're hearing a lot about companies working in this space, and there's a lot of investment going on in companies that are working on cultivated meat and seafood. One of the barriers for these companies is regulatory approval, but we are seeing some progress there, which is really encouraging. First products were approved in Singapore in 2020. Earlier this year, the US actually approved gave approval to 2 companies, Good Meat and Upside Food, and they were granted to produce and sell products in the US. And the Netherlands is the first European country which has allowed lab-grown meat tastings to take place. So starting to see some movement on the regulatory, so hopefully that will then result in more products coming to market. So this is just to show some of those new product launches which came out this year in January. And you can see there's a huge variety of different products, from savoury all the way through to donuts, convenience foods, some of our very well established products like the tomato soup that many of us grown up with, now being offered as a plant-based alternative. So no shortage of innovation. So with the drivers and challenges in this area, clearly one of the reasons or a couple of the reasons that people are looking to buy plant-based and vegan products, environmental impact. They're worried about the impact of particularly red meat and dairy products, and on the whole, most of the plant-based products will compare favourably on environmental impact. Clearly, animal welfare is always going to be favourable for the plant-based option, but now I think there's a huge variety of products. There's pretty much a plant-based or vegan alternative for every meal occasion and for all snacks. So you're almost spoilt for choice with the number of products that are out there. But consumers still do struggle with the taste and texture, the products being a little bit unfamiliar. Cost comes in as well, because you're taking a risk by buying that product, maybe taking the time to cook with it, and then your family turning their nose up and not wanting to eat it. So that can be quite a difficult challenge to overcome. There's also been quite a lot of criticism of some of these products because of the number of ingredients, the level of processing, and we are a little bit in a catch-22 here, because to achieve that taste and texture that consumers are looking for, often we do need to use a number of ingredients to get to that desirable taste and texture. But then the products come under criticism because the ingredient list is too long. So I think there's definitely progress being made, but it's still a difficult one for the product developer to work with. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about nutritional profile, because I think there's some pros and some cons across the market. So here I've tried to summarize the products, and I've obviously had to be quite generic here, but just to look at some of the macro and micronutrients. So protein, meat analogues generally are formulated to contain a similar amount of protein to the meat-based products. The protein quality may differ depending on the raw materials that are made, but often the quantity of protein is close. It's a little bit more difficult with fish analogues, particularly if you're working in the white fish area, because a lot of plant-based proteins can bring an undesirable colour. If we look at milk alternatives, it's really only soya-based products which come close to milk. All the others are fairly low in protein, and same with cheese. It's really difficult to get protein into cheese because it does impact on the texture, has some flavour implications. But again, we are seeing some developments here and some products coming to market which contain higher levels of protein. Saturated fat, the move for a lot of the meat alternative products to start using, particularly the red meat alternatives, to start using coconut fat has meant that sometimes the sat fat can be higher. But with fish and milk alternatives, equivalent or lower often, because you're often using oil in those products. Cheese alternatives, again, a lot of them are based on coconut fat, which might push the sat fat up. Fibre is used quite widely to help bind and give structure to the products, and this obviously has the added bonus of providing fibre in the product, and often you can see products making a claim because there is sufficient fibre being added, and clearly this is a nutrient which is lacking from the majority of people's diets, so that's definitely a benefit. In products like milk alternatives, soluble fibres can be used to provide some mouthfeel and creaminess. So again, seeing a boost in the fibre content. Sugar is not such a concern. I mean, if we look at milk alternatives, they do often have added sugar, but what's forgotten in that discussion is that milk contains sugar in the form of lactose. So often, because the sugars that are added are higher in sweetness, you can get away with adding less. Also, there are no added sugar variants available. Salt is a bit of a tricky one. It is needed for taste in these products, either added as salt or as part of flavourings and yeast extracts, etc. So often the sodium or salt content is a little bit higher. And then micronutrients. So meat analogues, quite often iron, B vitamins, the types of micronutrients that you would expect to find in meat are being added into the products. Same with fish, often omega-3 being added back in there because it's obviously fish is a very good source of omega-3 in our diets. Milk alternatives, I think fortification is very well established in this area, particularly calcium, vitamin D, but something we're seeing more products coming to market being fortified with iodine because it's been recognised that dairy is a very important source of iodine in the diet, and we were on the cusp of eradicating iodine deficiency actually by people moving away from milk and using the alternatives. The iodine intake has dropped, and particularly in some vulnerable groups like teenage girls. Cheese alternatives, probably less common in cheese alternatives, but calcium and maybe vitamin B12 being added. I took a look on Mintel just to see how many products are adding vitamins and minerals. So out of 108 launches last year, in the meat alternative area, it was 38 products were contained added bits, but only 5 were actually making a claim on pack. In the milk alternative space, 60 launches and 34 of those were adding vitamins and minerals, and actually most of them, 32 of them, were making a claim on pack. So what are the pros and cons of fortifying? Obviously, one of the big benefits is that you can bring the nutritional profile that much closer to the animal-derived products. So we're reducing the risk of any deficiencies by moving from animal-derived products to plant-based. And it might be a route to boost those nutrients which are lacking in diet. So I mentioned fibre as an example earlier. But if you're adding those ingredients, they have to be labelled on back of pack, which means a longer ingredient line. And we know that these products are susceptible to those criticisms. Also have to look at bioavailability, stability of the product through process and shelf life. And also these ingredients are going to add some cost. So just to finish up, so despite some doom and gloom in the media, the plant-based market is continuing to grow and innovate, just possibly not at the rate that was initially predicted. There are still barriers to purchase, and product developers are working hard to address those concerns. Fortification is common across the whole sector, but most common in the milk alternatives. And just there are a number of things that have to be considered, and I think we'll hear a little bit more about that from Jenny in her presentation. So I'm going to hand over to Jenny now.
Hello everyone. Let's put my screen up. Hopefully it's going to work. Hi. So I'm Jenny and I work for Harvest Plus, and Harvest Plus is a project of the Consultative Group on International Agricultural Research, or the CG as it's known, and the Harvest Plus group is based in the International Food Policy Research Institute in Washington, DC. We're a donor-funded and government-funded organisation, and Bill Gates described the CG as one of the most important organisations that no one's ever heard of. So if you haven't heard of them, you're not alone. And I wanted to start by giving you the sort of history really about why Harvest Plus exists and what biofortification all is about. And malnutrition, the latest figures, it's getting worse, not better, unfortunately, with COVID, the war in Ukraine, climate, and lots of natural disasters that have occurred globally. More people than ever are now suffering with hidden hunger. So 1 in 2 children and 2 in 3 women worldwide have at least one micronutrient deficiency. And the incidence prevalence of that is mostly in low middle income countries in Africa and Asia. And this all exists with the triple burden, where we have stunting, underweight, hidden hunger, and obesity happening all at the same time. And in countries such as India, where you have 100 million people now with diabetes who could benefit from additional zinc in their diet. So that's the problem. And what causes that problem very often is low dietary diversity driven by poverty, but not poverty in all cases. And as we all know, you can have access to the best diet and the most wonderful supermarkets and farmers markets and still have a very sparse diet. And I really like this graphic from National Geographic, which shows what the world eats, and that's a global picture. But you see there how heavily dependent we are on grains or plant-based foods in general. So 60% of the calories consumed on the planet are from wheat, maize and rice, and the rest of those, the other major staples. So in here we're talking about people who have a plant-based diet by necessity, really, due to poverty, which feeds in and has a very nice interaction with the global demand for plant-based foods in general. This is Howdy Buis, and he was the founder of the Harvest Plus movement, and he's an economist. He's not a nutritionist or a dietitian, and from an economic point of view, he saw the opportunity that if everybody's eating these foods, why don't we just make them better? So we can't change people's behaviors. People are going to eat bread and pasta and potatoes and rice, so let's just make those foods better from the outset. And the question was, can you make the crops do the work and inherently have a higher micronutrient content? And the answer to that is yes. So using a process known as biofortification, which results in nutrient-enriched crops, you can breed all plants to contain higher levels of micronutrients. And that might be where the plant actually assimilates the nutrition, such as beta carotene, or whether the plant absorbs more from the environment. Biofortification is a really broad term of processes that can be anything from using UV light on mushrooms to chicken feed. But in the context of Harvest Plus, this is more about the major staples that everybody's eating, and using plant breeding. In the most cases that Harvest Plus is non-GM. And that's not because there's any kind of issue there with genetic modification. It's more around consumer acceptance and the regulations in some of the countries we work in. But GM does have the potential to be a game changer in malnutrition, especially with golden rice, which has the potential to eradicate vitamin A deficiency, but we're still not there in terms of acceptance for GM. If people eat the staple, Harvest Plus has got a biofortified variety of that, and these have been developed through the CG centres, and Harvest Plus then takes the seeds, grains and foods to market. So we have the iron crops, which generally come with zinc as well as a carrier micronutrient in the soil, and then the zinc crops being wheat, rice and maize, vitamin A, sweet potato, cassava and maize. So these are the major staples that all humans on the planet are eating in a large quantity on a daily basis. And in most cases, these biofortified commodities or the nutrient-enriched crops are eligible to make nutrition and health claims. It's quite difficult with rice, given that rice is often consumed the white version, so it's been highly milled, processed, puffed or pre-cooked. And in general, these seeds, grains and foods were developed to tackle a public health problem, and the commercialization side of things and actually making the nutrition and health claims has come on later. So I wanted to give a bit more information about iron beans and millet, just examples, and the QR code there will take you to the product brochures. Iron beans are already a superfood in terms of the protein and the micronutrients that they contain, and they can be bred to be up to 90% higher in iron than their standard counterparts. There are 60 varieties of biofortified iron beans available in different countries in the world, and they would be a fantastic opportunity in the meat-free market. We heard from the previously about the use of vitamins and minerals post-harvest fortification in plant-based foods. And if you used a biofortified commodity in the first place, there is less reliance for post-harvest fortification, which also sort of feeds into clean label and more natural foods. And then pearl millet, it's the year of millet. There's a lot of international attention on millets from organisations like the FAO, and I'm sure it's become on your radar this year about everybody's talking about millet. Millet is another superfood with the potential to be used in plant-based, meat-free foods, and in many countries around the world, millet is a major staple, not only for household nutrition but also for animal fodder. And there is a great potential here for product innovation and reformulation, and using millets for products like breakfast cereals, breads, weaning foods. And the iron content of iron pearl millet is significantly higher than the pearl millets you would find generally on the market. So my job's quite easily, being a nutritionist in my background, not used to sort of sales and marketing and communication. It's a good thing really, because biofortification is pushing on an open door in terms of the major global food trends. So meat-free, clean label, natural, and of course ethical. So looking for foods that are good for you, good for your family, and also good for the world around you. All of the products that come through the Harvest Plus program are climate smart, as well as competitive in terms of yields and other agronomic inputs. Our mission is to reach 1 billion people by 2030, and we're well on the road to do that. This year is the 20th anniversary of the Harvest Plus program, and they've hit the milestone target of 100 million people. So I've just given you an overview today of Harvest Plus and biofortification. I could have talked a lot more about the countries that they operate in, the nutritional evidence, the policy work, all of those kind of things. But just as a starter, really, to show how biofortification and the nutrient enrichment of staple foods fits into plant-based diets. Always happy to answer any questions, and I'll now hand over. Thank you.
Hopefully that's showing now. Yeah, thank you for inviting me to speak with you today. As Kate said, I'm Hannah Pearce and I'm Nutrition Business Development Manager at Xampler. So in the short time we've got, I'll just tell you a little bit about who Xampler is, because I expect lots of you won't be aware of us. Then I'm going to talk to you about our natural materials, and our brand for that is Morrow, so Morrow Materials. And then importantly, I will then be focusing on our nutrient microencapsulation technology in the context of fortification. So just briefly, Xampler is a deep tech company based in Cambridge. It's based on over 15 years of research into plant proteins. It was founded back in 2018. Our natural materials have multiple applications that I'll touch on briefly, but I won't go into everything today. And importantly, our technology works with existing manufacturing processes and equipment, so it's very scalable, which is obviously really important with startup technology. So Morrow Materials are a world-first technology to make high-performance materials from natural plant polymers. So this is just important for you to understand in terms of what our materials are and what they aren't. We don't use any harmful chemicals. We don't use any cross-linking. So they're actually ideal for the elimination of some of the most polluting plastics because they're fully biodegradable in the natural environment. But because of these unique properties, the applications go far beyond packaging. The material is vegan, it's food safe, it's fully digestible, and is compatible with existing manufacturing processes. This slide just shows you all the different applications that Morrow is used across. So from left to right, we can make soluble film. So these can replace things like PVOH in home care products. We can also make them edible for things like this edible stock cube. We also produce a coating that can be used to extend the shelf life of things like produce and also use in packaging. But then we have here our microencapsulation technology, and this can be used in home care and personal products to replace the microplastics used in fragrance currently. But importantly, it can be used to encapsulate vitamins and nutrients to protect them in products. And that's obviously what I will be focusing on now. So Morrow Nutri, in short, are microcapsules that protect vitamins and nutrients from degradation. So what it means is that brands can use our technology to micropackage oil-based nutrients and ensure that it reaches the consumer intact and at full efficacy. So what we're basically doing is making these tiny microcapsules, forming a protective protein shell with our plant protein around the vitamin and nutrient, and protecting it throughout the manufacturing process and in shelf life right until it reaches the consumer. So what we're really providing is stabilization of sensitive actives against things like heat shock, so things like flash pasteurization, degradation from things like UV, low pH. Our capsules can offer targeted and enteric release, which I'll come on to shortly. We can also control the release profile, and we also can offer taste masking, which is useful if you're wanting to add something for its health properties, but maybe has less desirable sensory properties. And our material is compatible with volatile and non-volatile oils and fat-soluble ingredients. But why do we want to fortify products? And the previous speakers have already touched on some of this. And Carol mentioned about people shifting more to plant-based diets. And as we know, this can be for health reasons, can be for environmental drivers. And although a considered plant-based diet may provide adequate nutrition, we do know that animal-derived foods do provide significant contribution of many nutrients to the diet. This table here is just taken from our nutrition survey in the UK. And you can see here the contribution that many of the nutrients make in the UK diet. So obviously, if you're reducing and omitting these foods, it can make it harder to get adequate amounts. One example to focus on is vitamin D. You can see here that 74% is derived from animal-based products. So if you are cutting those out, you are likely to struggle maybe to get that vitamin. And we do know that deficiency is prevalent both in the UK and globally. And despite the government having a real push, especially over COVID, to get us all to take our supplements throughout the winter months, we're not a good nation of supplement takers. So there is a real role for really considered fortification, especially for certain population groups. this was touched on earlier as well, that some of the challenges of fortifying products is not as simple as just adding it in, and many of you that are working in the space will only be too aware how challenging it can be. Vitamins can be degraded in all sorts of ways by UV, low pH systems. Also, it can sometimes be affected by heat if you're pasteurizing a product. Also, it's important to consider the bioavailability, how much is actually reaching the consumer and having those desired health benefits. And we've touched on this as well, the regulatory side. Of course, if you're making a health and nutrition claim on pack, you need to know that there's enough there at the end of shelf life to meet that claim. And many companies get there by overaging, which of course comes with additional cost. There can be sensory acceptance issues, and also considering dietary requirements, ensuring you're not adding any allergens or excluding any dietary groups when you're adding in these additional vitamins, minerals, and nutrients. And this graph here on the right is vitamin D, just standard vitamin D powder in accelerated shelf life in a ready-to-drink fruit drink. And what you can see is that at the equivalent of 9 months shelf life, it's almost disappeared in this product due to the degradation. So when you encapsulate it in our material, it can protect it. So this is the same product, the same time period. You can see the degradation is significantly less as the cargo is protected in the product. So the capsules can easily be dispersed throughout the product, but remain intact and are protected from things like UV degradation and low pH, improving the shelf life. But beyond stability, the Moro materials also have a very unique enteric release. So the capsules themselves are insoluble in beverages, so they remain intact, as I've said already, but they are digested once they reach the intestinal phase. So they survive the oral and gastric phase and then are released at the point of absorption in the small intestine. This data here is from a study that Quadram Institute did for us, where they replicated standard digestion conditions for the time and the conditions. And hopefully you can see there we took multiple samples at each stage. You can see there the dark bar represents the vitamin D that's retained in the capsules and then goes on to the next stage of digestion. And the majority, so about 75% of the vitamin D, was released at the intestinal stage. So this gives it really, really superior bioavailability and reassurance that is reaching the consumer intact. And although this is for vitamin D, the same could be transferable for other nutrients. And then just to give you a bit of a case study, this is a product we've been working on with Britvic. We've been working on them for the last few years, and for all the reasons that I've said, they were struggling to add vitamin D to some of their fruit concentrates. Obviously a very harsh environment, low pH, undergoing pasteurization, plus they're moving to clear bottles for sustainability commitments, meaning that the vitamin D was being degraded quite significantly and needed protecting. So by using the encapsulated vitamin D, we can ensure that there is adequate vitamin D at the end of shelf life to meet the claims on pack. So this is really important to make sure you're delivering for the consumer. And it means we can benefit diets without them having to make a conscious change. They're already getting those benefits from products that they're already consuming every day. And of course, this can translate to all sorts of food and beverage products. So in summary, more people are transitioning to plant-based diets. It could lead to inadequate intakes of some nutrients, but I think there really is an opportunity for considered incredible fortification. Obviously, lots of different strategies out there, as we've already heard from Jenny, but fortification is a real option to improve the nutrition of the products that consumers are consuming every day. Our materials is a world first. It's natural, it's vegan, it's gluten-free, and the encapsulation can protect and preserve those vitamins and nutrients and offer superior bioavailability. So that is all I was going to say. You'll have my contact details, so I'll stop sharing now and hand back to Kate, I believe.
Thanks, Hannah, but you can stay on the screen. And can I invite Jenny and Carol to turn their cameras on as well? And thank you all, one, for staying to time, which is, you know, almost a first for us, I think, but also for some fascinating presentations. And can I remind everyone who is listening to this to drop questions into the chat, so that I can ask those to the speakers. I see a couple are coming in, so please do ask your questions. Carol, if I can start with you though, with probably a bit more of a generic question really, but as you said, I think the plant-based sector had had loads of positive press and it was in huge growth, and then it seems to have had loads of negative press, and it's all doom and gloom, and you kind of actually set the scene of what's really happening. But do you think there is still something around it that kind of needs a bit of a boost or a reignite to kind of really get that sector growing?
It does feel that way at the moment, yeah. And I think certain product types became very crowded. I mean, the number of burger options that were out there, plant-based burgers, was almost baffling. There were so many to choose from, and so I think it's only natural that not every product's going to survive, and we are unfortunately going to see those products that are either withdrawn or companies that don't survive in this in the competitive landscape. But it does feel at the moment that we need a new good news story to really sort of boost interest, and also I think to bring in those consumers who are really meat lovers, fish lovers. They really want to get the authentic taste, and I do see that the cell cultured is going to be a big part of that. Whether we go full cell cultured, because obviously that's very expensive, or whether we move to a hybrid model once some of those regulatory barriers are removed. I've spoken to a few people who say that actually you don't need to have the product completely based on cell cultured. It can be that you use a combination of that and plant-based proteins. So it just feels as though we do need some new products to maybe liven it up and bring in those new textures and tastes. Also maybe products that aren't supposed to look and taste like meat, so offering something that isn't trying to imitate but provides the nutrition, the center of the plate, the experience of having and I've seen I have seen a few products now coming to market that are based on grains, based on beans, based on lentils, those sorts of products, which actually are really tasty and appealing.
Yeah, and I think certainly if I sort of think across launches I've seen from the companies that we represent, you are seeing that real spread across. And just one more for you, and then I'll come across to Hannah. In terms of, I thought it was really striking, the figure you gave that said a third of consumers are talking, will say they have plant-based milks, but it's way lower, I think, in the kind of meat and fish analog, or even in other dairy, really. Yeah. What do you think the reason is for that real split? Why has plant milk taken off so much?
I think it's a perception that those products are somehow healthier for people. That for some reason a lot of consumers see that dairy milk is not a good thing to be consuming, and that by making the switch to a plant-based product, they're doing that for a health reason. If you dig into it a little deeper, those reasons may not stack up, but that's my impression, that a lot of people think that it is a healthier option to move to the plant-based. Obviously, when you look at some of the products, the protein content's very low. A lot of them aren't, apart from maybe some added vitamins and minerals, they're not really delivering against that consumer perception, but I think that's where it's coming from.
Yeah, interesting. Hannah, there's one for you. Well, pretty certain it's for you. It doesn't actually give you a name, but it talks about encapsulation. So which, you gave the example of drinks, obviously, but what kinds of products or what food matrices can the encapsulated nutrients be added into?
Yeah, so the capsules are food certified by IFST. So in theory, they can go in any food and beverage that you like. But obviously there's not always going to be necessarily a role. So where we've seen the greatest benefits have been in things like beverages, where companies have often struggled for all the things I've talked about. They're quite difficult products to add something like vitamin D into, and that could be similar for other nutrients as well. We are, I should probably make clear, a tech company, so we've got a very active R&D team, often looking at different applications and different things. So really we can try all sorts of different development and try all sorts of different things. But I think the enteric release is a really interesting aspect, because I think that does give a sort of new angle to it, depending on what your product is, what your application and who it's for. that is a real USP potentially compared to other fortification options.
Yeah, okay, interesting. And then Jenny, the question actually is very specific to iron pearl millet being commercially available in the UK. But if I can obviously answer that bit, but if I can broaden that out a little bit as well, and you know, because obviously initially you were very much set up and focused on public health problems in developing countries, and so how more broadly is the UK or other European countries your kind of target market? Is it easy for companies to access your products, or are you still very much focused in on those developing areas?
A bit of both, really, and it does depend on the commodity. So wheat, for example, you don't see much sort of global trade and movement outside of the countries they operate. It's much cheaper to grow wheat in your own sort of region, whereas things like millets and beans are grown in specific areas. So there most definitely is the opportunity there for import, and we would like to see more demand in the UK for iron varieties of pearl millet. And in general, there's a lot of interest from the food industry, but it's sort of the barrier to actually getting your hands on the biofortified ingredients. So where do you procure them from, which is what we do in terms of linking manufacturers with the supply, or working with manufacturers so they can produce their own biofortified varieties. It was certainly not sort of it can come from anywhere. We know that smallholders can't produce enough food for all the major global corporations, but we do want to see a much bigger demand for biofortified commodities in all food businesses' supply chains.
And is that with a hope that will then more biofortified crops will then therefore be grown if there's a bigger demand for them to come through?
Yes, definitely. And it's the improvement in the food system at large, really, in terms of improving the nutritional content of the food system. So we're tackling hidden hunger on a global scale, but it also sort of normalizes the technology. We don't want biofortification to be seen as like the poor person's food or the poor person's choice. We want it to be an aspirational technology that helps in other areas, especially in food innovation and plant-based meats. And also, it's not just a case of biofortified, everything will solve all the world's problems. It needs a combination of biofortification, fortification, and most definitely supplementation as well. But yeah, in general, the advocacy work we do for biofortification is to increase awareness about biofortification and get food businesses involved in it for the products they're already working with.
Interesting. Carol, there is one that's very specifically to you. It starts, hi Carol. But it is talking about basically the slide that you showed, which actually had different macronutrients, but talking about the protein concentration and comparing protein levels in meat versus plant-based alternatives, and that kind of idea, I guess, in popular culture or in certain areas, maybe that meat and protein are synonymous, and actually that doesn't need to be the case. Do you see that is still something that that companies are hearing from their consumers? Is that a concern when people are developing plant-based products?
Something we see is that is one of the targets when developing a plant-based meat or fish alternative, is the desire to at least be in the same ballpark on the protein content, because there's quite a vocal opposition to these products, and if the product is lower in protein, that's seen as, you know, an area that could be criticised. So it's kind of, you know, price of entry really into the market, and there are products out there which are matching meat, so you need to kind of compete.
Okay. And then this is interesting. I think you could probably go across all of you with a slightly different view. There's a question about how quite obviously, as Carol indicated, actually, there's a whole range of reasons why people start to move to a plant-based diet, and some really want the kind of meat analogues and some don't. And so quite a few consumers are going towards being veg-led, or indeed product developers, and not looking for analogues. If that's the case, so the question is, do we need to fortify if people are just using veg? So which one of you would like to take that question first?
I don't mind coming in with a start of a 10, and I think I made this point very briefly. A very considered plant-based diet, I think you can achieve a lot of your nutrients, but not everyone has all the time to consider exactly how they're going to balance all of their micronutrient intakes. And obviously there are certain population groups, we know young girls struggle to get enough iron, and obviously meat is a very available source of iron. So I think, yes, I definitely wouldn't discourage people having more vegetables and fruit in a plant-based diet. But I think we'd have to be, I think it needs to be considered. And I think that's often the role of organisations. What role is your product playing in people's diets? Who's consuming it? And actually, can it add any additional micronutrients? And talking about some of the different strategies that we've considered. But yeah, I think certain micronutrients, I've talked on iron, things like zinc as well, potentially calcium if people are cutting out dairy as well, potentially. So I think you'd have to, look at the whole diet.
Yeah, I couldn't really add to that. I think that's a perfect answer. It's going to depend on the product. It's going to depend on your consumer, and obviously we're all going to be supportive of including more veg in the diet, but that's not necessarily going to offset the potential to be missing out on certain micronutrients. Yeah.
Jenny, anything to add in?
Yeah, I completely agree, and I think in an ideal world, yes, we all be eating more veg and plant-based foods, but just looking at the evidence, those foods don't always contain the micronutrients that we're missing out on mostly, and you can increase that through biofortification. So even the most sort of nutritious foods would benefit from having the more nutritious variety in the biofortified variety. Also more nutrition sensitive agriculture as well to increase the nutrients from the environment. But even with the best will in the world, if you're really in control of and monitoring your own diet, which is largely plant-based, it's likely that you're going to be missing some micronutrients like iron and zinc, and there's most definitely a role for fortification and biofortification in all these circumstances.
Yeah, no, I think I completely agree with all of you. It is, of course, brilliant to eat lots of veg, and some people are moving to that, but we are also very aware, of course, as I think everyone on this call is a nutritionist, that we are very lacking in certain micronutrients in certain sectors of our population, and that can make it more difficult depending what people choose. Hannah, one for you, I think, although please others come in, but I'll direct to you to start with, because it is specifically on so effectively, as you as a company are looking at developing products, when you look at the micronutrients, are you kind of looking at those? Are you looking to develop in areas where we know, as in the UK, we've got lower intakes?
So I think I explained this before, but I'll maybe explain it a bit clearer. As a tech company, we can develop what's required. So in the case of vitamin D, there is a definite need in the population, but also it was a requirement for a specific brand that came to us. And in the same way, if other brands came to us, can we encapsulate this? Can we try this development? We absolutely would try that. Our technology works really well with fat soluble cargoes. So vitamin D is a great example, A, D, E, and K. Other active oils potentially, we've talked about fish analogues and things, fish oils, algal oils, things like that could potentially be encapsulated. But very much we're an open door to try these different development projects rather than putting things on the shelf, if you like.
And do you think it will, so would your anticipation be it will be driven through companies coming to you with certain requirements, as opposed to you going out to companies with a we can offer.
Yeah, I mean, it works two ways. If we can see there's an absolutely brilliant gap that, you know, that we think our technology can fill, then obviously we will start to look at that. But often it's when a company is having a challenge, potentially a technical challenge, and potentially this is a very new technology. Can our technology help resolve that challenge? You know, and that's what we're here to see. So yeah, so I definitely encourage brands to think about their fortification strategies and their nutritional profiles.
Right. Okay. And I guess sort of broadening it slightly to you then, Jenny. Obviously the micronutrients you have focused on were originally driven through a very specific public health need. Do you imagine that you will be trying to develop crops that can be biofortified for other micronutrients, or you're very much sticking with the, I think it was 3, wasn't it, that you talked through?
Yes, iron, vitamin A and zinc are the ones of priority, because they're the major sort of missing ones in the countries where we're operating in. But it is also possible quite easily to biofortify with things like selenium and iodine. Vitamin D is difficult, and this is why, you know, supplementation and other technologies are really important in that area, and using the combination of the two tools together. Some nutrients are just really quite difficult to biofortify with. Usually if it's there in micro quantities in the first place, you can enhance it, but biofortification of vitamin D is not common, certainly not see any good examples of it. So that's why it's certainly not the silver bullet.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to do a quick last call for questions, because we are almost to time, and also a little bit of an apology because I understand that you can't upvote questions at the moment, but rest assured we can see everything that's been asked and we are going through them. So I think well, that's an interesting question, which I don't think people will be able to answer. But there is a question about milk alternatives, effectively saying which milk alternative is, in terms of nutrients, compares best to dairy milk. They specifically call out calcium. I'm guessing we wouldn't be able to do that on brands. But Carol, have you a view? Is there a particular type of alternate in terms of the, I guess, the staple it's made from that compares best to milk?
So in terms of protein content, the only one I've seen really is soya-based products. It's actually really difficult with most of the other bases that are used to make milk alternatives. The taste often and the texture really do limit, you know, how much of that ingredient you can include. I can't really comment on the calcium. I think generally most of them those that are fortified to match the calcium content of milk. Clearly, calcium is quite a difficult one because it tends to be fairly insoluble. So you need to suspend it through the matrix and make sure that it's not all sitting at the bottom of your pack, because that's not going to do anyone any good. And you know, bioavailability needs to be considered as well. But I think in general, calcium content tends to be fairly consistent across all those that do contain some added calcium.
Yeah, okay. And then I think this is probably coming up to be our last question. There might be time for one very quick one if someone else has a burning one they want answered. But I thought I would just bring in cost, because it's obviously on everyone's mind at the moment. We hear an awful lot about food price inflation and also about food inequalities. And so any development you wouldn't want to drive inequalities in micronutrient intakes. So if I start with you, first of all, Carol, but thinking about that, I know you mentioned Asda, and I think Lidl had a launch. Generally, do you see that we are seeing launches across the different price points for products? And then I guess Hannah and Jenny, does the biofortification or the encapsulation, would you see that as kind of adding into cost points?
So yes, we are seeing products coming in at a lower price point, and this is the good side of it being a fairly crowded market. You know, you've got competition there, and so the price is having to come down to be competitive. but these are expensive ingredients to formulate. There's a lot of R&D, and the starting materials are fairly expensive. We're often not in a level playing field because of the subsidies for meat, for example. So you're probably easier in other areas, but certainly with meat, we're obviously not always paying the price that we should be paying for those products. So the plant-based alternatives look expensive in comparison.
Hannah.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, if you're going to start fortifying products, you are adding additional ingredients, and it will cost more. But from a sampler perspective, we're aiming to do this as competitively as we can, and make it. That's why I made the point about being able to do this at scale, so it can be done on in significant volumes. But I think the other thing to make as well, I made the point about overage as well. If you are adding things and you're having to add twice as much, 3 times as much, actually, if you can be certain that what you're adding is going to be there, at the end of life, then without the significant overage, and that's also got to be taken into consideration. But I mean, hopefully you can see that, the fact that we're working with brands like Britvic, it's an everyday fortification. It's not a very premium, specialist ingredient. It will be, cost effective to go into everyday brands and products.
Right. Jenny.
The target market for the Harvest Plus programme is the very low income, so we have to make sure that what we do and the products that actually get out there are very low cost. So we're looking at staples and just the basic beans and flours, and given that the R&D is subsidised by governments and donors, there's no reason why it should be more expensive. In most cases, the biofortified variant should be cheaper. Sometimes, because we're only just getting to scale, the costs go up because of demand and people want it. But we do want to see premium products that have been biofortified, just so it doesn't become a sort of technology for the poor people. So there's a place for it for the very low income consumer and in premium markets.
Brilliant, thank you. And thank you all. I think that is all we have time for. We have just clicked on to 3 o'clock. So it remains for me to thank everyone who has attended our webinar today. Apologies if we didn't get to your question. The speakers' contact details are on the screen now. So should you have further questions or want to find out more about the work that they are doing and the products that they are making where that's relevant, then please do contact them. We will share a recording of the webinar, which includes the Q&A session, to everyone who has attended today via email, and it's also available online at the webinar hub on IFST.org. Webinars. The link is right there in front of you. Before you log off, it's super helpful to us if you can fill out the short survey, which will launch as soon as the webinar ends. And it just remains for me to thank very much Carol Bingley, Jenny Walton and Hannah Pearce, who've been your speakers today, and to thank you all for attending. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, bye.